So I'm Azeem Azhar. I'm the founder of Exponential View and an investor in early stage AI startups as well. And what I want to do is bring together and focus a couple of the very important points that Peter raised in his presentation. Let's come back to what we're actually seeing within generative AI, which is that ChatGPT is now a $10 billion a year consumer product. It launched in November 2022 as a test. Sam Altman was expecting 100,000 people, which is frankly nothing, to sign up for it, and now we're approaching 1 billion people using it every month, and you can see that inflection point at $10 billion. Let's be clear about this. This is not some non-technology being pushed by a vendor like the metaverse or like hydrogen. This is literally a product that people want and voluntarily pay for. And it's not the only one. Claude is from Anthropic, is running at $3 billion in revenue now. It was at a $1 billion run rate 5 months ago. So there's enormous consumer and enormous business demand. It's absolutely record-breaking. Sundar Pichai, who is the CEO of Alphabet, said a couple of weeks ago that demand for tokens, and a token is a little bit like the atomic unit of an AI system, had increased 50-fold in Google over the previous 1 year. So you're seeing an enormous amount of demand for this in enterprise and from consumers. And there really is an acceleration. I mean, Peter described the acceleration. I'll give you some data to show this to you. So the big AI companies release these foundation models, and prior to November 2022, the big companies released one model every 6 months. And ChatGPT gets launched. It turns out that we've found out how to deliver this product, and the model releases have gone to every 2 weeks. But I've excluded all the Chinese companies, and I've excluded all of the models being released in other domains. Foundation models for time series analysis, foundation models for proteomics, foundation models for material science. And the other thing to note here is every one of these X's involves probably an amortized cost at this end of $50 to $100 million, and at this end of $1 to $2 million, sitting on data centers that are progressively bigger. Tens of megawatts here, hundreds over there. And this is triggering that enormous infrastructure cycle that we heard about. And again, just to put it in perspective, back here, 2022, CapEx by the large hyperscalers was already approaching the CapEx of the super majors. And then in comes ChatGPT, and you see the number rise. This is only how much they're spending on GPUs, on Jensen's chips. This makes up about 50 to 60% of total CapEx, because you've got networking, you've got cooling, you've got power, and the buildings themselves. And what you can see is probably by our estimates, by our forecasts, there's sort of $3 to $6 trillion new CapEx emerging as a consequence of this. And every single dollar here translates directly into watts that are required. Down here, those top NVIDIA chips were going to run at 700 watts. By the time you get here, the single racks are 100, 130 kilowatts in a 19-inch rack. I mean, it is a tremendous change, turning into an enormous demand for electricity. And that's given rise to some alarming numbers. And I'm sure we've all seen the IEA's numbers. The one forecast is 800 terawatt hours of incremental AI demand. But let's put some of that into context, okay? So one context here is, of course, we're electrifying and where the world is getting richer. And that's light blue line is air conditioning, data centers, still air conditioning up at 600 or 700 terawatt hours. How do I interpret this number? So it's clearly wrong, not simply because it's from the IEA, but Also because ultimately to deliver this kind of number requires physical equipment, right? It requires transformers, it requires interconnect. And so there are going to be certain constraints on here. But the second reason why it's likely to be wrong is that you've got these multiple exponentials. You've got this exponential, which is the growth in demand from consumers and businesses. You've got a second exponential, which is there's an enormous amount of energy efficiency going into these algorithms and these systems, which is very, very hard to predict. And the third exponential ultimately is going to end up being about how much will industry actually be able to supply. Now, Bloomberg New Energy Finance has come out and said this number by 2030 is going to be 300 to 350, not 1,000, just because of constraints. And I think there's a lot of validity in thinking this will be constrained. But what won't be constrained, and I think Peter made the point very clearly in his presentation, is the absolute demand and the absolute priority and urgency with which the large tech companies, the US government and the Chinese government are going to ensure that AI services get delivered. They will not want these services to be held back by other constraints. And the funny thing about the curves that I deal with in my life, 30 years like Peter in the tech industry, is that they are those compounding curves that turn into those exponentials or those exponential phases. So it's incredibly surprising for me to see a curve that looks like this, which is US electricity consumption per capita going back to 1990. I mean, the Soviet Union was still a country. And you will notice something about this. In my world, this is a flat curve. In my world, nothing has really changed. And the thing that I find quite odd is that ultimately energy is prosperity, right? Energy is health and energy is wealth. And when you look at a curve like this, and it's worse in Germany, it says something about the strategic stance, the posture of a state, of how it looks to the future. And it is so different to this curve, which is how people are moving towards AI. And I think that these curves are going to start to collide. Let me see if I can get it back. Oh, here it is. Right. So what have we got here? What have we got here is fundamentally something that will have to change over the coming years and change really, really dramatically. Partly when I talk to people in the energy space in the US, as I have done this year in Texas and in Florida, I've said, what were you thinking? Like, what were you doing over the last 30 years? Because I can't quite work it out. Last year, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and I made the point that this 19th century technology, which is electricity, will threaten the US's lead in AI, in the deployment of AI. Because ultimately, you need those data centers to serve many, many people. We're only serving 800 million people at a very, very shallow level today. And so what you will have seen in the last few weeks is these Gulf deals, where the US has gone off to build data centers in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. And they're really anchored on the fact that this is where you can get not kilowatts, not megawatts, but gigawatts, and you can get long-term commitments. But the thing to note is anchored out of Dubai or the UAE or Saudi, within a 100 millisecond ping, you can reach all of Europe. You can serve all of Europe with a chatbot. You can serve all of Europe with agentic AI applications from there. And it's a deeply strategic play. It's a strategic play that for the first time in a while, I think, this world may have more than one and two poles battling it out. There may be an emerging third pole coming out of there because someone has figured out that AI is going to be the infrastructure of the 21st century, and AI requires power, and if we can deliver the power, we'll get the AI and we'll own the infrastructure. The truth is that the demand for all of this, oh, pardon me, I've skipped a slide. Let me go back to here. So I just want to say something about energy efficiency here, which is that set against this is a tremendous amount of energy efficiency. The NVIDIA chips that we've discussed in the past are getting progressively more energy efficient. This is the energy efficiency in flops, operations per watt that's delivered. They are on an upward trajectory, and there are new modalities in the gray. Reversible computing is one, which may actually deliver this processing 10 or 20 times more efficiently than it is today. And the second thing that's true is that outside of hardware energy efficiencies is software optimizations. So the challenge with the deep learning networks we have today, the transformer models, is that for every doubling in the number of AI tokens they serve, they quadruple, naively, the amount of energy that's required. It's a quadratic relationship, which is really unfortunate. If you think back to what Sundar Pichai said, there was a 50-fold increase in Google token usage, which should lead naively to a 2,500-fold increase in energy demand. Of course, there wasn't a 2,500-fold increase in energy demand for two reasons. One is, under the hood, Google is working incredibly hard for software optimizations, order of magnitude optimizations, to make this more efficient. And secondly, just like NVIDIA, Google is working hard to make their hardware more energy efficient. And we will still sit in that nexus of Jevons paradox, which is that demand will go up, but it's not going to go up quite as catastrophically as people, quite as linearly as we might forecast. And that's important because the demands have only just started to get going. You know, we are at the point where how many people here think they spend more than 16 hours a day engaging with their AI systems? Right. So that's not going to be the case in about 10 or 15 years because they will be ambient around us the whole time. How many people have got more than 5,000 AI agents working on their behalf 24/7? Well, that's not going to be the case in 5 years' time, where I'd expect most of the room to put their hand up. So we are at the moment at the cusp of an incredible explosion of demand and use, and we have to be prepared for it. The way I look at this is that it constructs a demand stimulus into the energy system, one that is really driven by customers wanting to pay here and now. And some of this demand stimulus is coming through the demand, solar and batteries for long-term storage. Some of it is restarting diesel generators or gas plants. Some of it are slightly wild and wacky ideas like fusion plants. This is me at the Commonwealth Fusion test reactor. But what you're getting is an incredible demand stimulus from customers, the hyperscalers, who are very, very smart and very, very rich. And that generally is a good thing if you're in the business of supplying power. What we know about the future is that it's going to be much more about AI and technology. We know that because we can see it historically. This is Brussels, 1980, Apple's one of their less successful computers. Back in 1980, 1% of global GDP, or less than, could be allocated towards a technology industry. We were literally in a pre-digital society. By 2025, we're at 15%. And the question to ask yourself is, where do you think that will be in 2030? Will it be back at 1%? Or will it be heading towards 25, 35, 40%? And if it's the latter, what is going to power that? It's going to be electrons. And in the case of Europe, the question is, do you want to be able to provide those electrons, or do you not? So, thank you very much. Should I stay up here? Oh. I'm not allowed off.
No, you're not allowed off.
Right.
Azeem just said, oh, am I not allowed off?
Yeah.
No, you're not.
I'm going to stay here.
Yeah, you're going to stay here now for a discussion. Peter, would you like to come and join us again? Fabulous. Thank you very much. And then one more person to bring up on stage.
Love the Lisa.
Yeah. You've going to go and take seats, gentlemen. So, one more person to bring up on stage. Absolutely delighted to welcome him. Please welcome Michael Liebreich.
Thank
you. Do you want to go on the end? Just because then we can get all the cameras right and it looks better. We can see you all properly then on the big screens. Fabulous. Thank you. Michael, of course, the chairman and CEO of Liebreich Associates, co-managing partner of Ecopragma Capital. It's really good to have you here. Really good to have the three of you here, and I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. We're going to sort of chew over some basic points, and then it's going to be over to you. So you can ask whatever you want. But Michael, what I wanted to do was start with you first, if I may. We've all had our minds blown by Azeem and Peter. Put it into the energy sector for us, the energy industry. What this means?
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm tempted. By the way, if I come across anybody who says, oh, you know, AI is a big fat nothing burger, you know, we've been here before, and so on, then I start sort of extolling its virtues, and I try and draw on either Peter's work or Azeem's work as my absolute source. But because they've done that so well, I would sort of take the opposite view and say, you know, let's keep it all in perspective, in the sense that certainly, you know, in my work, I mean, how many people here have used let's say ChatGPT or Perplexity to answer basic energy questions? Right? All of us have, right? And every so often, mostly it's pretty good, and then every so often it's just dramatically wrong. And I asked, for instance, what proportion of natural gas in the US is used to generate electricity? And it told me how much electricity came from gas, which is a different question. So an answer to, but with complete authority, it told me this. And I pointed out to ChatGPT 4.5 that it was wrong, and it repeated the same answer. So, you know, we all know that, okay, so that's my first point is, yes, but with that preamble, it is clearly transforming the way that we operate in the energy sector. And, you know, it's trivial things, maybe trivial, not if you work in a call center, like the chat bots, if you query your bill, those sorts of things. And it clearly has enormous implications for things like, imagine if all the data on frequency, voltage, inertia, reactive power across Europe was available to Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, and you could ask it now, what the hell happened on April the 28th, and get the definitive answer. Not 6 months later when La Red Electric decides that it has reputation managed itself sufficiently that it can release a report, but right now. So it's clearly going to be transformational. And the other side of it, of course, is on the demand side, where, you know, Azeem showed some of these kind of huge, you know, demand, the huge amount of demand, which really we need to put into the context of returning to demand growth in the developed market. So Europe, USA, we are returning to what we actually saw in the 50s, 60s, 70s, actually even before, that demand growth for electricity, that flat line that Azeem showed, that's over. Whether it's electric cars, whether it's electric heating, whether it's electric industry, and on top of it comes AI, it's not that big. It's not that big. What it is incredibly concentrated in a few locations and demanded with extreme urgency by some incredibly rich people. So it is going to have enormous implications. The final thing I would say is, in terms of investment, and those figures are how much Microsoft is spending and how much Amazon is spending and how much everybody, and Stephen Schwarzman, the great private equity investor, says they're going to spend $2 trillion between now and 2030 on this stuff. And I got news for him. He's a much smarter guy than me, much better financier, but they're not. And the reason they're not is, don't confuse their market cap, $13 trillion market cap for these companies, with their balance sheets, which are only $2 trillion. They are not going to spend $2 trillion on real estate. That I know. So I think that what we're going to see is one of these, followed by one of those. And I hand back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Let me just throw you the quote that Peter used at the end of his presentation. That was the Winston Churchill quote. And I scribbled it down. If you don't take change by the hand, it'll take you by the throat. It was change, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. If you don't, so, from your experience, Michael, is the industry taking this change by the hand, or should they anticipate that that change is going to take them by the throat?
Gosh, speculating about the anatomy of the industry and which particular piece it's using to address the AI challenge spurs all sorts of thoughts.
Is it embracing that change, though?
I think it is learning fast, what I would say. I would say that it's trying to, there's clearly, I'm going to say it, there's a wave of hysteria. ChatGPT arrives and everybody plays with it and makes some images and the rest of it, and then suddenly it's like, oh, crap, this really has implications both in the services that we offer and in the services that we have to deliver. And there's a period of irrational exuberance. Everybody is developing data centers. I mean, I talk to every single infrastructure fund, every single investor, every single utility. Everybody is developing data center projects. What is now happening is a filtration process where you suddenly realize that you need cheap power, you need access to cheap cooling. It needs to be somewhere near a fiber connection, but not just a normal one, but really robust, one of the really big, the backbone of the data system. You need to be in an environment, regulatory environment, where you can build it. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a former MEP and a big mover behind energy, and I said, these data centers, it's unbelievable what's going on. They are huge. We're talking 1, 2, 3 gigawatts, and they cost 20 billion euros per gigawatt, and it's unbelievable. And he said, yes, we really need to get ahead of it. We absolutely have to get ahead. I said, what do you think that means? He said, we must make sure that the heat they produced is not wasted. We need district heating. And I thought, well, good luck. Go to Amazon Web Services and say, before you can build a data center, you have to build a district heating system, right? So we need, there is this kind of realization wave that a minority of all the plans that you've all been working on, probably, a minority of them are actually going to happen. So is that being taken by the throat or the hand or the whatever? I don't know. But maybe it's a kind of thesis, antithesis, synthesis moment where we realize what it does do, what it doesn't do, and what we actually are going to build in terms of infrastructure and what we think is good. What Sam Altman wants to have in 2026 is probably going to be 2032.
Azeem, do you want to come in on that one?
Of course. Well, we had Lenin, and now we've had the Hegelian dialectic.
You're sitting in the middle.
I'm sitting in the middle, yes, so maybe I'm the synthesis. Building infrastructure build-outs like this historically will generally go through periods of overbuilding and then undercapacity. What's different about this one to, say, the telecoms bubble in the 90s is that in the 90s, during the telecoms bubble, the build-out of cables and dark fiber grew at a much faster rate than customer demand, revenue demand for those services. And we saw this bubble, and we benefited from that a decade later. We're in a different position here, which is that the customer demand growth, in other words, either consumers or businesses wanting to spend money, and it's not just on ChatGPT, it's on coding assistant tools and a whole load of other things, is growing much, much faster than the growth of the investment into the underlying infrastructure. So I think that is a slightly different dynamic for us to contend with. And I think there's another point, which is about the type of power that's required right now. So of course it's better to get it cheaply. But if you look at the overarching cost of running a data center and amortizing it over the 5 to 6 years that the chips will be good for, the cost of power doesn't really make that much difference. I mean, it's better to get it cheaply if you can, but it's much, much more important to get it. And so, yeah, cheap is a nice to have than that at this moment.
Peter, can I ask you a question which might be taking us in a slightly different direction, but it's been bugging me, so I just want to air this. we're talking about a ridiculous amount of energy that is going to be used, and capital as well. But actually, let's just focus on the amount of energy and how we will produce that and all the implications that it has. When or is there going to be a conversation with the public about how to use all these tools, all the possibilities, in the right way so that we're not needing to generate energy that actually we shouldn't be using, and the infrastructure costs of providing it, et cetera, et cetera?
It's a really good question. It all boils to the fact that I think you cannot stop behavior changes. And I think one of the questions I have for you is, I don't know if you have kids, but going back to Michael's point, aren't we overhyping this? And I think no. And the very simple reason is I look at my kids. So we have a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old. And I remember the point in time where I started realizing that their access to information was fundamentally different than mine. And that must have been 6 or 7 years ago when I had a conversation with my son, who was then 12 or 13, and he had a question, and I said, look it up. And I watched him go to YouTube. And I said, no, you're doing it wrong. You have to go to Google. And he said, no, you're doing it wrong. And that was one of those wow moments where I realized I'm the old guy using Google, and he was the next gen using YouTube. When I look at my kids now, they all are using AI constantly. And whether it's a Perplexity, or whether it's the AI overviews from Google, or they use ChatGPT, and there is a profound shift in behavior. And this is something that is unstoppable. Now, the energy elements, I don't know if you guys still use Facebook. I still use Facebook. The only reason I use Facebook every morning is I see whose birthday it is. That is the only reason I use Facebook. And every morning I go to Facebook and say, happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday. And it's just sending a message, right? If you use an AI search, it consumes 10 times more electricity than a normal search. If you generate an image, that's a factor 10 on top of that. If you generate a video, it's 10 times more. So making an AI video is incredibly power hungry. And very soon, Meta is going to allow you to not just say happy birthday, but make a personalized, generated AI video that basically consumes the shit in terms of electricity. And you know what? People are going to do that. You cannot stop this changing behavior. But I'll say one more last thing. We are in a phase where this is now being subsidized. If you look at Uber now, we're paying a lot of money for an Uber. I remember 6, 7 years ago, it was dirt cheap if you used an Uber in San Francisco. It was $3, $5. Now you pay $70 for a ride. And the VCs have subsidized us into becoming addicted, and then we're paying through the nose. There's a really big chance this is going to happen in AI as well.
Michael, Peter's obviously right on this one. If stuff is there, people are going to want to use it. But is there going to be a conversation about energy as a resource, like water, like food, like actually using it appropriately? Or is it just going to be like, we just have to provide more energy?
Well, so, there'll be a conversation. There'll be lots of activists saying, making videos, birthday videos, it's outrageous when other people don't have, basic energy supplies. Sadly, the way that gets moderated is generally through the market, through the allocation, through the pricing mechanisms. But I think Peter's last point about the current subsidy, because everybody has used this stuff, and kids are using it all the time. I'm using it all the time. We're using it. Can I just do a quick poll? How many people here are actually paying for one of these? Not paying through your pharmaceutical design through a company, but you yourself have subscribed with your credit card and have an annual subscription to something. Right?
Something else.
To one of these AI services,
Complexity,
ChatGPT, Replit, whatever it is, right? Okay, so that looks like about 15%, right? How many people are paying $500 a year or more for this stuff? Okay? Now,
How many people don't want to work it out?
right. So here's the thing. There's about 100 million people in the world who are kind of like us, connected all the time, on the phone all the time, working mainly using data and digital tools. 100 million. And if they spend $500 each, that's kind of like a phone bill, that's a $50 billion industry, right? You cannot spend $200 billion a year on CapEx with an industry that only has 50 billion of revenue, right? Now you can double it because there's pharmaceutical design and folding proteins and all sorts of commercial uses and so on. But that's the real challenge. The industry, although, and of course the revenues have grown so fast. Why? Because I subscribed to Perplexity and then I decided that it's crap. It can't be trusted. So I subscribed to ChatGPT. There's another $200 gone, right? And it can do certain things. So we're very quick to adopt, but unless you have billions of people paying $500 a year, then as I say, we're going to see that, and then we're going to see that. I love the enthusiasm, but I am going to play the kind of the voice of moderation here.
Yeah, and I also wonder, because we see so many times that there are free versions, and actually the public consumers are very sort of in the mode of, why should I pay for, on Facebook, making your AI video. By the way, I mean, all power to you still on Facebook, but you're right about the birthdays. Should we take some questions? And just see sort of, what direction you'd like to go in with this. 3 amazing people on stage. Let's get some mics in the audience, microphones in the audience, and see what you would like to ask, what you'd like to hear more about. First question, who'd like to give a question? Yep, fabulous. Let's grab a we'll send a microphone your way. Sorry, at the back, in the white shirt. There we go. Fabulous, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you, Alexander, Zulke Group. I see that there are enthusiasts and optimists and realists or pessimists based on the technology as always. Quick question. My son doesn't trust me anymore. He trusts ChatGPT more than whatever I say. So the world in 10 years will be filled with people like my son. Are you worried or excited about that fact? Whereby I agree with the curve, I would say that technology has not seen such a speed so far, because we have theoretical works in November and then actually living and implementation in March. That speed was not registered so far. Thank you.
Peter, yeah.
I'm a pathological optimist, so I really believe there is so much good that could come out of this. At the same time, this is the first time probably in my entire professional career that I've been so worried about some of the consequences. There's a very perverse effect that we're now seeing a generation of students, like your son, my son, that are growing up with this as the most normal thing in the world. I see an alarming debate going on in the education system, where the way that we're training people, educating people, is the fact that they're also becoming completely reliant on these tools. I think we're going to have a whole cohort of students that are now going to graduate that actually won't be able to function without this when they get into a corporate environment. Back to your point about creating addiction. At the same time, the potential to use this to actually do something amazing has never been there. And it's not just isomorphic labs from Google that is making new drugs. I think we're going to see an enormous amount of activity with deep specialized knowledge being built, and our necessity as humans to rise above that and to recalibrate what is human and what is machine is the most exciting thing that I think we can experience as humankind. So I am thrilled and deeply worried at the same time.
Is there a particular bit that worries you? Because I get what you're saying, and it is a very sort of general concern about how that generation is functioning or not, but in a particular area maybe?
I think if there's one main concern that I have is that the tension between everything that is trying to regulate this and the reality of how this is evolving is so completely disconnected that the speed at which this technology is evolving is something I have never seen in my life. And you see an entire regulatory field being completely ignorant on how to deal with that. And that spread is, I think, extremely worrying.
John, both of you want to come in back?
Yeah, I think these are privilege. I know Peter has an Android phone, but this is the privilege of a luxury and affluent society to ask these questions. If you look at data of how optimistic people feel about the prospect of current technology, which is AI, and you go to East Asia and South Asia and poorer parts of the world, 75% of people are optimistic. If you come to places with nice cathedrals that were rich in the 20th century, 25% of people are optimistic. And so I think that tells us a lot about how we look at these technologies. I don't think it makes sense to be skeptical or not about AI any more than it would have made sense in 1905 to be skeptical or not about electricity. I can't function more than 48 hours without my infrastructure of clean water coming from the tap, electricity, and frankly, my Nespresso machine, which I can't function, doesn't work for 24 hours. So the notion that we would start to rely on our technologies is one that is embedded in being human and living in complex societies. I think what we're contending with is a lot of contextual sense of where have we come from and do we really need to deal with change, because it was all very nice and comfortable up until the pesky Russians invaded Ukraine 3 years ago. And I think that the reality is that these are technologies, they're part of our infrastructure, they're going to emerge, and we are best positioned to adjust their flight path, to shape them by being active and participating in them.
Go on, Michael, yeah.
So what I would be concerned about, the particular concern, is in the outputs that your son is receiving, he can't tell how much of it comes from a human or real data and how much of it might not, that fake answer. And I'm very worried about that for a few reasons. One is, if I invent a whole new genre of art, or I write an amazing song, which the chance of that, by the way, is 0. But if I write a wonderful piece for Bloomberg, and then the AI can take that, can use it as training information, and then start spitting out stuff which may or may not be correct, and is certainly not giving me credit or money. And over time, I do worry that we're now getting to a situation where AI is being trained on all the stuff out there, of which an enormously increasing proportion is AI, which means that it's untethered from reality. By the way, in this group, for this audience, what's very interesting is, of course, energy data is tethered to reality. So that's one of the areas where I think we should be, I don't know if it's steering AI, but the concern maybe is less extreme, because if you use it on real data, then it's more likely to produce real output. But I do worry that your son is going to become dependent the same way we're dependent on email, electricity,
and
clean water, etc.
Terrible.
But the question is, can he distinguish? Does he have the tools to distinguish and to be critical? And my final piece of advice is take him on a camping trip.
I'm sure he already has. It is that final point, and it's the critical thinking skills that we are all looking at that generation, and ourselves as well. We are practically out of time. I just want to really firmly bring it back to the energy industry, because believe me, we could talk about all these topics forever. But for this audience, I'm just going to run down the line, and I just want a final thought that you want this audience to take away to maybe deal with the next 5 or 10 years, up to you, when it comes to supplying. And Michael, I'm going to start with you, and I'll end with Peter.
We've been in similar situations before where we've had extraordinary hype, and then eventually we figure out how these tools, productivity tools, which is effectively, I'm afraid, what it is, get integrated into our life. So separate the signal from the noise.
Thank you. Azeem.
We are in a period where there will be demand growth for electricity, and the posture you have to take is one of a market that's going to be quite dynamic over the coming years. It's a huge opportunity. What industry doesn't like to grow? What industry doesn't like to have new opportunities and to organize its resources to chase after them? So it's a great period.
Peter?
I think a final thought is, today AI has become a blanket, but AI is actually a spectrum. And everything going from the structured data to optimize, raw data to the whole spectrum of search and generative AI. And the problem is we're using one word for all of that. Don't do that. I think in this sector, you're going to be able to use machine learning to optimize resources, and that is something you've been doing for a long time. It's only going to intensify. But the other end of the spectrum is, as Azeem said, an enormous set of opportunities, and it's going to change consumer behavior profoundly, but see it as a spectrum, not as a one blanket.
I think you have blown our minds, reassured us, told us more things to think about, and given us such food for thought that I can only thank the three of you. Absolutely superb. Michael, Azeem, and Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
You.